Hello and welcome to Medical Dialogues, your daily dose of health and medical news. I'm Mr. Zaman, and as you all must be aware, the conference of the European Association for the Study of Diabetes is being held from 19th to 23rd September. The conference ensures that the global diabetes community can benefit from the latest research and innovations in the field of diabetes and offers various options for exchange and interaction. Now, I'll be discussing a few key topics from the conference. Dairy products in moderate amounts may protect against type 2 diabetes, but red and processed meat raises the risk. Dairy products, especially low-fat ones and yogurt, are associated with a lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes, according to new research presented at the annual meeting of the European Association for the Study of Diabetes in Stockholm, Sweden. Red and processed meat were linked to a higher risk of T2D, but moderate amounts of fish and eggs could be eaten in their place, according to researchers. Existing dietary guidelines for the prevention of T2D recommend eating specific plant-based foods such as whole grains, vegetables, fruits, legumes, olive oil, and typically advise limiting consumption of most animal products. However, not all sources of animal protein are nutritionally equal. Knowing how different animal products are associated with type 2 diabetes would allow the guidelines to be updated, making it easier for people to choose the best foods to cut their risk of diabetes. To do this, Dr. Annalisa Giose and colleagues carried out a review of existing meta-analysis into links between different animal-based foods and diabetes. The PubMed, Web of Science, Scopus and Embase databases were searched for dose-response meta-analysis of studies into the relationship between different foods and type 2 diabetes. The 13 meta-analyses that were suitable contained 175 estimates of how much 12 different animal products may increase or reduce the risk of developing T2D. There was a substantial increase in type 2 diabetes risk with the consumption of 100 grams per day of total meat and 100 grams per day of red meat, and with 50 grams per day of processed meats. The quality of evidence was moderate. 50 grams per day of white meat was associated with a smaller increase in type 2 risk. Dairy foods, in contrast, appeared to protect against type 2 diabetes or had a neutral relationship with the development of condition. Milk, 200 grams per day, was associated with a 10% reduction in risk. Total dairy, that is 200 grams per day, with a 5% reduction in risk, and low-fat dairy, that is 200 grams per day, with a 3% reduction. Yogurt, 100 grams per day, was associated with a 6% reduction in risk. Cheese, 30 grams per day, and full-fat dairy, 200 grams per day, were found to have no effect on the risk of type 2 diabetes. The quality of evidence was moderate to low. Drinking plenty of tea may reduce the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Drinking at least 4 cups of tea a day is associated with a 17% lower risk of type 2 diabetes over an average period of 10 years, according to findings presented at this year's EASD annual meeting in Stockholm, Sweden. For the study, the researchers first studied 5199 adults with no history of type 2 diabetes from the China Health and Nutrition Survey, who were recruited in 1997 and followed until 2009. The CHNS is a multi-care prospective study looking at the economic, sociological issues and health of residents from 9 provinces. At the outset, participants filled in a food and drink frequency questionnaire and provided information on lifestyle factors such as regular exercise, smoking, and alcohol consumption. Overall, 46% participants reported drinking tea, and by the end of the study, 10% participants had developed type 2 diabetes. After adjusting for factors that are known to be linked with increased risk of type 2 diabetes like age, sex, and physical inactivity, researchers found that tea drinkers had a similar risk of developing type 2 diabetes compared to non-drinkers. In the next step of the study, the researchers did a systematic review of all cohort studies investigating tea drinking and the risk of type 2 diabetes in adults aged 18 or older up to September 2021. Overall, 19 cohort studies involving 10,76,311 participants from 8 countries were included in the dose-response meta-analysis. Overall, it found a linear association between tea drinking and type 2 diabetes risk, with each cup of tea consumed per day reducing the risk of developing the disease by around 1%. When compared with adults who didn't drink tea, Those who drank 1 to 3 cups daily lowered their risk of type 2 diabetes by 4%, while those who consumed at least 4 cups every day reduced their risk by 17%. The associations were observed regardless of the type of tea participants drank, whether they were male or female, or where they lived, suggesting that it may be the amount of tea consumed rather than any other factor that played a major role. Excess weight, not high blood sugar, associated with increased risk of COVID-19 infection and long COVID. High BMI rather than high blood sugar levels are associated with excess risks of COVID-19 infection and long COVID, according to a meta-analysis presented at this year's EASD annual meeting in Stockholm, Sweden. To find out, researchers looked for associations between a range of clinical characteristics measured before the pandemic: HbA1c, self-reported or medication-based diabetes, BMI and waist-to-hip ratio, and self-reported COVID-19 infection and long COVID in 9 ongoing UK cohort studies. All eligible participants had data on previous measurements and completed at least one questionnaire during the COVID-19 pandemic, covering questions on COVID-19 and, where possible, questions on the length of ongoing COVID-19 related symptoms. Participants reported having COVID-19 based on a positive test or strong suspicion. Long COVID-19 was defined as symptoms that went on or affected functioning for longer than 4 weeks post-infection and was compared to those reporting symptoms for less than 4 weeks. Between May 2020 and September 2021, 5,806 participants reported ever having COVID-19 and 584 reported having long COVID. Analysis of data from 31,252 participants in 9 studies found higher BMI was associated with greater odds of COVID-19 infection, with a risk 7% higher for each 5 kg per square meter increase in BMI. People with overweight and obesity had 10% and 16% greater odds of COVID-19 infection respectively than healthy weighted individuals. Similar results were observed for long COVID, with the risk 20% higher for each 5 kg per square meter increase in BMI. People with overweight and obesity had 20% and 36% greater odds of long COVID respectively. However, for both COVID infection and long COVID, associations with categories of BMI were not all statistically significant. Analysis investigating the association with waist-to-hip ratio were inconclusive. Study shows game-changing obesity drug more than halves risk of type 2 diabetes. The risk of type 2 diabetes or T2D is more than halved by weekly injections of new obesity drug semaglutide, according to new research presented at the annual meeting of the European Association for the Study of Diabetes in Stockholm, Sweden. Semaglutide was recently approved in the US as an obesity treatment and has been provisionally approved to treat obesity in England. Obesity is known to increase the risk of T2D at least 6-fold, and Dr. W. Timothy Garvey and colleagues were interested in whether semaglutide could reduce this risk. To learn more, they carried out a new analysis of the data from 2 trials of semaglutide. In step 1, participants 1,961 with overweight or obesity received an injection of 2.4 mg of semaglutide or a placebo weekly for 68 weeks. Step 4 involved 803 participants with overweight or obesity. All received weekly injections of 2.4 mg semaglutide for 20 weeks. They then either remained on semaglutide or were switched to placebo for the next 48 weeks. Participants in both trials received advice on diet and exercise. The researchers used cardiometabolic disease staging or CDMS to predict the participants' risk of developing T2D in the next 10 years. In the step 1 participants receiving semaglutide, 10-year risk scores for T2D decreased by 61%. This compares to a 13% reduction in risk score for those given the placebo. Risk scores mirrored weight loss, which was 17% on average, with semaglutide versus 3% with placebo. At the start of the trial, risk scores were higher in the participants with pre-diabetes than in those with normal blood sugar levels. However, semaglutide reduced the risk by a similar amount in both groups. In the step 4 participants, the largest decreases in risk scores were seen in the first 20 weeks. In those who continued receiving semaglutide, the risk score decreased further to 7.7%, but in those who were switched to placebo, it rose to 15.4%. This indicates that sustained treatment with semaglutide is needed to maintain the reduction in type 2 diabetes risk. That's all for today. Stay tuned to Medical Dialogues for latest updates.
Never miss a medical update from Medical Dialogues. Like, subscribe, and press the bell icon.